I came from a lower middle class background. So I think my approach to everything has been frugal from day one. Tech has been a huge disruptor. It is certainly creating a lot of efficiency, but I'm sure it is also creating a certain amount of anxiety, particularly the young people. I'd say in 5 years, a fair part of the population is going to have dual jobs.
Today, we are thrilled to have a pioneer who has truly redefined what it means to be a leader in modern India. Ronnie Screwvala is a name synonymous with innovation, impact, and reinvention. Revolutionizing Indian media through UTV to championing rural development with the Swadesh Foundation, Ronnie has worn many hats, and each with remarkable success. He also played a pivotal role in shaping India's entertainment landscape, producing iconic films like Rang De Basanti and Barfi, and later also building one of the country's most successful edtech platforms, Upgrad. Whether it is transforming industries, uplifting rural communities, or empowering the next generation of entrepreneurs, Ronnie's story is a masterclass in purposeful leadership. Ronnie, it is an honor to have you here on Future Unplugged. Welcome to the show. Ronnie, we're living in very disrupted times, and it's an interesting time that we are doing this. You've done multiple hats over the years, in the entertainment industry, then as an investor, then as an entrepreneur. And I'm sure many of the disruptions that we are seeing today, you've used them to your advantage, because people say that there is opportunity in every dislocation that happens. So can we just start with that? How do you see the current state of disruption, and what does it mean for anybody who's trying to be successful in business or elsewhere?
So, I think the disruption is on multiple fronts, right? I think the geopolitical situation is one, and there are two wars waging. So the question of commodities, pricing, oil, airlines, and everything goes to a particular. We've just recovered in some form or the other from a pandemic, where I think we've become a lot more astute and a lot more resilient on many other factors. I think when you're looking at India, I find it to be extremely opportunistic, because I think it is a country that's not going to be ignored, and we'll have a level playing field better than what we've ever had before.
Right.
So I think that the respect and the ability and the opportunities that are there, and the fact that we're not going to be ignored, to me, just sounds like a really good place to be in. So today, I think anyone feeling despondent, I think, is wasting their positive energies. That you need to be a lot more sharper and a lot more astute and a lot less trusting and a lot sharper about the fact that you can make your long-term plans as long as you feel you're in more control.
Right.
So get a little bit more in control of your own destiny of what you're planning.
Right.
I think the opportunities are quite exhilarating.
Right. So you say that the opportunity is high. We're living in a world which seems to be focused a little bit on, we'll always learn that globalization was good, and we opened up the economy back in 91. Many of us benefited from that, etc. We at least started to compete. But these days, there seems to be the fervor of deglobalization, and people are looking inwards, or it appears that people are looking inwards. Do you still see that the opportunity exists even in a world which is increasingly focusing on deglobalization?
If you ask me, I think the rhetoric is more nationalistic, but I think economies and the consumer wanting to have this aspirations is quite global.
Right.
And I think the two are quite segregated. They may be connected in some way. So the rhetoric will keep that way. That's how I would see it.
Right.
But I think, to answer your question very directly, the political rhetoric is a lot more right than left around the world. Right. And it's a lot more nationalistic. And I think India's rhetoric has also been that way. And I think in the last 10 years, it's not been to the detriment of it.
Right.
Sure, we've had a few issues, but notwithstanding that, if we had to rate it in the overall places, the sense of nationalism that has come in here is actually beneficial.
Right.
For the economy, for the opportunity, and for everybody else.
Right.
I'll give you an example where I think a million students go out every year to study.
Oh, right. Yeah.
We're the largest now market. China goes up and down. So, but you just look at the study abroad segment. I think 10 years back, 1 million out of the million people wanted to go to migrate.
Yeah.
And I've seen that because we're in the epicenter of that at Upgrad, of what we do there. I would say 700,000 of those are not looking, they're looking at going out to learn, understand the competitive field, but come back to the country. So if you look at it from that point of view, there is globalization, but there's still nationalism.
Yeah. Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. India embraced globalization back in '91. I think it was also about the time that your first venture, if I may, UTV really became a household name at that point in time, and you had multiple partnerships. I mean, the business obviously did wonders from 50 crores to 1,000 crores and more over a period of time, and you did multiple partnerships. So how would you react to the first opportunity that you had where you could actually JV with foreign partners? They were interested in going to the homes of millions of Indian consumers who possibly only saw one channel at that point in time. Yeah. How hard or easy was it at that point in time?
I don't know about the hard or the easy part. I think the question was, we were quite clear what we wanted to necessarily build. And I think India was becoming an interesting market at that stage from a communication point of view. It only happened because of satellite. Right. So I think if you look at the whole media landscape, it would have been quite introvertish if it wasn't for, at that stage, a platform which was Star TV, that Li Ka-shing in Hong Kong started. Yeah. And then Subhash Chandra bought a transponder and launched ZTV. Right. And at about the same time, Rupert Murdoch bought the whole of Star TV from Li Ka-shing. Right. If it wasn't for that satellite advent, outside from the stray situation of very few urban people who checked into five-star hotels to watch America invade Iraq on CNN, I remember that, the whole scenario wouldn't have changed. Yeah. But that change then brought about an entire capitalism of a very different nature to the broadcasting industry, which is at the epicenter, because to the content industry, because it was suddenly become more global. So I think it was a very interesting time at that stage. But as soon as that happened, the fact that India needed to be on the map for most people looking at Asia, there was only China and India. And China is locked up from a content point of view, because basically it's a very different way to operate. Here, we are one of the few people that have been very liberal on FDI, on the entertainment and content sector, with the sole exception of news, where you have a 25% cap. Yeah. So that in itself meant that if you did what you were doing, you would attract the right kind of foreign partners, where I think in a country like India, you need to partner locally. Yeah. So I think it started with Murdoch and News Corp, then went on to Disney. And I think one of our interesting partnerships was also with the Bloomberg, where we started the business channel. Yeah. So, and there I can tell you, it took us 1.5 years to convince Bloomberg to allow us to have a JV, because they were quite clear that under no circumstances will they allow somebody else in a country, anywhere in the 165 countries which they operate in, to create content of their own. It took us 1.5 years. But finally, because that was the only way they could do it. But finally they cracked and they allowed that. And actually then that's become a model for them in many other countries. As you go forward. So I think at that stage you were pushing the envelope, and there was a great amount of cross-learning.
Right. So, one of the things that I want to talk about is regulation. I mean, even today we talk about regulation, and there is sector-specific regulation. But I mean, like when you were building UTV, if I may, the regulation was getting peeled bit by bit, right? I mean, of course, that was many of these sectors were considered very, very sensitive. News, of course, was considered hypersensitive. How was it to be able to build a business in this domain, in this broader domain, when there were so many regulatory challenges, if I may call it so, just because, maybe we were not comfortable with foreign investment, or everything was used to be looked upon with a microscopic eye. How?
So there were multiple regulatory paths, right? I mean, I'm not saying they were all disruptive, because frankly, I just want to caveat that the US is much more difficult to do business when it comes to media. Right. Okay, you had a Rupert Murdoch that had to change his nationality from being Australian to American to operate there. Nobody's done that in India.
That's right.
So just to put that into perspective, yes, media is one way of influencing minds, young minds, either in news or in content. So I think each country needs to have its own context of that. So I'm not dead against that context. Actually, when we had our first investment, foreign investment, Warburg Pincus was our first investor in UTV. And at that stage, when we went to the FIPB, which is the Foreign Investment Promotion Board that you had to get, now it's the CCI and things like that. There wasn't a sector for media and entertainment. So we finally got our approval under the tourism department, because we were making airline programming for airlines. Right. So everyone thought because they said there's no category called media and entertainment. So it was that nascent at that stage. I think second, the whole Cable Act, the Cinematographic Act, all of these were strong regulations. When we started our first cable TV connection, the Cable Act we were under the Post and Telegraph Act.
Oh, right. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
That you were.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So I guess it's also, I think my background, I came from a lower middle class background. So I think my approach to everything has been frugal from day one. When you start with that base camp of you got nothing to lose, you kind of look at those challenges as, okay, not how you're going to dodge it, but how you're just going to move with that thought process. And I think the solutions then emerge. As I said, there was no question of not having that investment. We went there and we presented them, says, if you don't have a segment, which other segment can we be in? And we found a solution. In cable TV or in copyright law, and then later on, I think everywhere, regulation-wise, you work with that. But when there's a momentum to grow a sector, I think you can cross those bridges.
Wonderful.
I mean, I think if you look at the telecom sector today and TRI, it's actually been 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but net, the consumer has benefit.
Yeah.
We can say that they slowed down a certain amount, and then there was a lot of setback. But today we're the cheapest talk country in the world.
Yeah.
So 600 million people in rural are getting to understand YouTube, are getting to understand weather conditions, thanks to the fact that between the competitive environment, between the TRAI, we've actually been able to get regulation for the consumer.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right about it. So I have 2 more questions in this segment. The first one really, I also gather that you set up a cable operator business back in 91 called Network or something. What inspired you to get into this segment and not something else?
There, I would say absolutely, that was my ever first venture before anything I did, before media also, right? And I think at that stage, when I wanted to be an entrepreneur, I wasn't really sure exactly what. Now, today, you normally have this great idea and then everything revolves around that.
Right.
But I think I used to do a lot of theater. So my exposure to, at that stage, what we call media was there.
Right.
Because I used to do front of television camera. So I was worked with Doordarshan in a morning show on Sunday morning and a kids show on a Wednesday evening on that. So the exposure and thinking of alternatives in television was there at the forefront. And then we realized we didn't have a choice. We just had a single channel. When you travel, you're always excited about landing. There it was about not getting out of a hotel room when you travel, but sitting in a hotel room because you had multiple TV choices. So just that very fraction that you can have that and India doesn't have it was the essence of it. And, I can tell you that for a year, we had 0 response. I would say 10 out of 10 entrepreneurs would have packed up because even the team members that I had, they said, maybe it's a little too early. Maybe we should try something else.
Yeah. You mentioned just one thing on the previous response about partnerships in India. And you of course spoke about media partnerships. I've had the opportunity to do deals and private equity all my life. And one thing which I must say is that not many partnerships have really succeeded, right? There could be the one up north in the automotive side where they had a good sunset and they got, each one of them got what they wanted from the JV, etc. But there are few and far between, if I may. Why do you think that, generally, is it the choice of partners, or why is it that foreign investors generally, and leaving private equity aside for a moment, haven't had the greatest experience in their partnerships?
Yeah, my insights actually would be 2. One is the JVs are formed because global companies want to come into India and they feel therefore they need a partner. Right. And then an Indian partner at that stage didn't have that self-confidence to run my own business. So it was a big bragging right that somebody from Japan or US tied up with you. And I think the second one is obviously that when it's a true JV, the agendas will change over 5 years. For global companies, priorities will change. India was an important market, India is a less important market. Suddenly, India is a 10 times more important market. Why am I sharing 50% of my spoils? Not because of capital, not because of technology. Now I can hire people here. I've already understood the consumer, I've understood the market, I've understood pricing. I might as well want to go out on my own.
No, absolutely. So let me, since we are talking investing, you're a prolific investor in multiple segments. Of course, we'll speak about Upgrad, but also, multiple other investments. And Lenskart, of course, comes to mind. But when you started this whole phase of investments, and India had opened up, the whole private equity money was quite evident, etc. At some point in time, also the investors almost spoiled for choice because there was so much growth and there was so much growth capital at that point in time. But in some ways, you've sort of narrowed your choices to a few segments. What made you decide that you'll do Unilaser in the way you have done it, and not maybe chase what maybe the other growth investors were doing at that point in time?
Yeah. So firstly, I would say I'm an accidental investor. Right? I'm not an investor by strategy. And the reason I say that is because everything that I had from resources and time and money went into building the media part.
Right.
It was only when I divested that and moved out of there and sold to Disney that for the first time I had a liquidity event in my life. Otherwise, as I said, as a first generation entrepreneur, lower middle class home, my father would have a question of, why don't you own Cipla shares? Why do you have only our Tata shares? Why do you only have UTV shares? So it was all in. Right. So that's the first time one got a liquidity. So I think the reason it was accidental was because at that particular stage, when I divested, I wasn't dead sure what I wanted to do. So the right thing for that to do was to say, look at different sectors. And that's pretty much what one started. But I think in about 2 years, I realized that I'm much more somebody who wants to roll up my sleeves and start doing something all over again. The other part I would say is the liberating part is when you normally are an investor, you're also taking other people's money. Then you're a fund. Then you have to work within a very different guideline. So I think my flexibility was its own capital, and I therefore want to do it where I think I can add value or I can see something going. Sometimes it could be pure financial instinct. Sometimes it could be an impact instinct. Sometimes it could be, I can help this for the next 10 years. And there wasn't a veranda and there wasn't a horizon. And neither was I there that says, if I do this, I'll have a track record. If I have a track record, I'll go out and raise funding. So I think my benchmark was a lot more different. Some private family offices now have that same liberty where you feel, I'm not going to start a fund. So the minute you're not into, as an investor, need to raise money, your entire approach to investing is very different. Because the other one is every 2 years you have to show your mark to market, and you're already starting, half your brain is thinking about the next fundraise than your investment. So you're almost positioning that way. And that's the ecosystem. But if you're not in that ecosystem, you're a different set of investors. So I think my ability to be able to do that was just based on my own capital, my own risk appetite, my own ability to add value. And therefore, I looked at sectors that are a mix of impact or huge consumer stories, where I think my early days, I learned scale, brand, and could I bring some of these to the table with fellow entrepreneurs to take them to the next level?
So Ronnie, I think the whole Swadesh Foundation, which you run very successfully, and something that I relate to because we have a foundation running for 17 years, and our guys go wherever there is problem, where there is challenge. I have a great guy, Javeed. He runs there. Wherever there's flood, he'll go there. I mean, we are helping some victims, the Rohingyas in Bangladesh, and so on and so forth. So I relate to that quite a bit. But Swadesh Foundation that you have, and the investing and the impact investing component, do you think they sort of got together a little bit? Was that the reason that you were more on the impact side because you also had the heart and the foundation, or was it were the two kept separate?
Well, I would say no. I think media is actually also a pretty high impact sector in many ways. Right. It sounds a little flimsy, but actually it influences a lot of minds. So it is an impact sector. Second, I would say actually the birth of Swadesh was 20 years, 30 years back. It was in a different name. Again, we only scaled it up because then we had resources and a bank balance. When I divested with UTV, that's when my wife's arena, I decided that we wanted to scale it up. Sure. Upgrad is in the impact sector because learning, skilling, education is something that is going to create impact at scale. But that it's with a for-profit mindset, because I'm also a firm believer that a not-for-profit has to be worked very differently from a for-profit. There can't be mixture between the two. Can't be something for less profit because it doesn't work. Then it's lost in the woods. Yeah. If you're for-profit, use it. And because anyway, 90% of everything that you make in for-profit goes back into scaling. Yeah. But a non-profit DNA and a for-profit DNA is quite different. The fact that a for-profit can be in an impact sector, but still should go all out in a commercial sense, actually is greater because it allows you to scale up much better. The ability for what we do in Swadesh in a very not-for-profit mindset, and what we do in Upgrad, which is for-profit, allows that balance in a very strong manner.
Also, I was reading that possibly one of the first to be listed on the social stock exchange, and the way you raise money from a lot of people who contributed, it was quite unique at that point in time.
I just felt in the giving back space today, we have a few people who do this pledge that I'm pledging 100 million, I'm pledging $1 billion. I'm not a fan of that, to be very honest. It's a very American thing to do. And I think it's not necessarily. because after that, you got to still follow that through. So to me, anything that builds credibility for people to give back. Today, most people are giving back because they don't, about hesitation because they don't know who to give it to and whether it'll be used properly.
Right.
So I think the legitimacy of a social stock exchange blessed by the NSE, BSE and SEBI was a big one. So one really rushed into it to participate. The ecosystem is not one where you can appoint a banker and new people will come in because there is no ROI. The ROI is here. The ROI is not here.
Right.
The ROI is impact. So how do you convert an exchange approach and an underwriting approach where you're actually telling them this is a soft impact, it's an impact measurement? Yes. So I think I felt we were fortunate enough to be able to go out to larger people and approach people in the industry sector and the celebrity sector that can actually be good brand ambassadors in the future. And I think therefore, to me, it was important to get about 150 people from retail,
Right.
individually in their capacity to come in and make an investment. And investment is the wrong word because it is a donation, but it's also an investment. But it's an investment in impact.
Right.
What we are now showing to them that this is where you were, the before and the after, the update, that's the very important follow-up. Because I think if you show impact, which is not easily done here, we can do repeat ones. So I think we want to do 3 or 4 listings a year on this because this is not where you list your Swades, you list the project.
Yeah.
And I think that's an incredible mechanism. And I would say that about 10, 20 countries in the world have started that, but it didn't work for them. So I think full marks to NSE, BSE for actually seeing it through.
Yeah. The institutionalization of this space, hasn't really happened. And, as you said very rightly, that many people take different routes to it. But do you think there is something which the government could do or groups of people could do to sort of make it more institutional so that the impact is visible, as you said? I mean, that's wonderful what you said, that the impact is getting visible to the donors, so to speak. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so there are 2, 3 parts to that. You see, I think the first is giving back is a very personalized thing.
Yeah.
And it should be because that's when the real passion comes in, other than when you're just cutting a check.
Yeah.
So the people who are creating the environment, they do the actual work, because you have to cut a check for somebody to do the work. You're not cutting a check to give it out for somebody's square meal, because that's perishable in 1 minute. You're not creating lasting impact.
Correct.
So you need the NGO system and the ecosystem that's doing long-lasting, deep work so that people can then fund it. So I think the CSR part has been a strong part of institutionalizing, and it's only growing. That's one. 2, I think more and more organization companies, even an organization of yours, is now involved in impact measurement. So when you look at impact measurement, that's building credibility in that. And that's ecosystem wasn't there before. If you didn't have serious money that didn't ask for serious accountability, you wouldn't have serious impact. So that graduation has happened. And the third is that the government is doing a lot of work. Part of that work they need to do for welfare in any case. But 2 things that I think that have changed it today is the biggest gap between the government and sometimes the community is actually trust. And I think the NGOs today are building that trust between the government and that. And that, trust me, because when you work with the government, they're saying, I want to give, but we don't know. Yeah. Outside of the fact that, yes, the present government has been able to change that what an intermediary gave you funds, now it's coming straight into your bank account. That has changed the lives of millions of people, because there they feel in control. Otherwise, they'd have to go find and wait in a line for somebody to maybe give them their right or what was allocated to them as money and give it to them.
Right.
Today, it's coming to their bank account. So that one single move has changed mental poverty and physical poverty mindset with a lot of people.
Right.
So I think that's the third part there. And the trust element that NGOs can build between the government and the community will mean that the government can mobilize. Today, when we are outlaying Swades about 120 crores a year of our own resources and donors and partners that we do that. But now we've been able to channelize government spends directly. We don't collect from the government to the community of 2 times and 3 times that outlay because we got them together. Otherwise, you'd have hospitals, but nobody in the hospitals. You'd have funds for roads and infrastructure and pakka houses. So that entire element of, if you see in rural India today, the infrastructure for side roads, not just the main roads, has become a lot. Otherwise, accessibility to even go out and come back was a problem.
Yeah.
So I think a lot has changed there, and we are getting into this sense of awareness in institution much more than before.
Yeah, so your vision is sustainable an irreversible change in the pockets that need it the most. And I think that's
the sustainable being the most important.
Being the most important one. So, Ronnie, if I may, you mentioned that upgrade is also in some ways an impact, and I think that's quite evident considering today when we talk about the skilling needs of India. I mean, I was reading somewhere that maybe 50% of India's own population, the jobs that they have, possibly underskilled for the jobs that they currently have.
Not job ready.
A huge amount of skilling which is needed.
Yeah.
And in some ways, you've all, many tech businesses have tried to fill in the gap, but Upgrade has been a bit different in that sense. So how would you distinguish between a typical tech business, some of which have done very well, some of which have had some difficult situations, etc., and Upgrade, which seems to be, as you said, fulfilling the need and also on the impact side?
Well, firstly, I think the people who, with the perception from the outside of some of the people having not done in the EdTech, have been more in the K-12 sector, not in the what we would call the workforce development sector. Right. So that's the first distinction that I would make. Second was, it was much more about obscene amount of monies being given to them, much more than what they needed to do with what they wanted to do with that, because these sectors don't need that kind of money. When you have that kind of obscene money, you send it in an obscene manner. So I think if you take that part out of it, the actual good and impact there has been very, very substantial. I think the question here is, the goalposts are changing. So change is going to happen. The point I was making to your main question was that when we even say when we're job ready, it's going to be a moving thing. Even when we solve for 100 million people, there'll be another 100 million people that'll be not because we are 1.4 billion people, but it's because the benchmark of what ready is changing.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think the goalpost of what is job ready is getting redefined every 2 years. So you think I'm ready, and then 2 years later, you are already not ready. So I think that's the excitement for a company, for us, for Upgrade, where we actually see the fact that our job is to preempt the careers of tomorrow.
Yeah.
Our job is to actually see to it that every 2 years, your benchmark is going to move backwards, and how do we move you forwards? And I think if you look at that with a long-term point of view, and you have to take a 10-year view on it, that's the differentiating part, rather than I'm selling you a degree or I'm selling you a skilling program, which is obviously the case. The means to the end is still that. But the benchmark is firstly, you're outdated. Secondly, every 3 to 5 years, you'll have to update yourself. And the bad news is that even after that, you feel okay, now I've done it. Now why should I do it all over again? I did it in college. Now I did it here. Now again, you want me to do it? Yes. Because the goalpost of what is job ready is changing. 5 years back, each of us, we'd have a discussion with our HR saying, let's look at the bottom 10%. Either we need to change them or rotate them. Today, it's the bottom 50%.
Yeah.
Because an organization is not going to grow.
Yeah.
I'm only looking at the top 50%. If you're not in the top 50%, the balance 50% is immaterial.
Wonderfully put.
It's not relevant. It's not somebody I must retain.
Wonderfully put.
So if 10% went to 50%, you have to move with the times.
Yeah. But do you think that the average Indian student or people who are, the Gen Z, as you say, are they curious enough for what's coming next? Because, unless that curiosity is there, the urge to learn and be successful tomorrow will not be there. How?
I mean, the answer is yes and no, with a more no than a yes, to be honest. Because it's not about the curiosity, it's also about awareness, actually, from that perspective. The general gratification of get me a job is a little bit too obsessive in that context. So then just the level of tolerance, the level of acceptance, the level of the window for going there is actually part of the reason why you're not in a position, because your socioeconomic reasons, the reason why 25% instead of 100% of the people have not gone into an undergrad degree is exactly that. Socioeconomic reasons have got you to, I need to work. I don't have a choice in that process. Now that's changing, where people are coming back and doing online degrees to just top up on what they couldn't do then, and they didn't have that luxury to do that.
Right.
But I think I'll give you an example which is slightly with partly going tangential. Like in our Swadesh Foundation, we do a lot of skilling work, right? And I think about 5 years back or 4 years back, actually, our skilling used to be in various sectors, but very basic ones. Today, hospitality is turning out to be the largest one for people wanting to, in rural India.
Yeah.
So you're saying, are they curious in this thing? Yes, we've got girls and boys there who want to take on hospitality. 5 years back, those same people wanted to be electricians and carpenters. So that's one element. The second one is when we would skill 20,000 people, we need to find jobs for the 20,000 people. Today, 10,000 of them say, you don't worry about that, sir. Just skill me. I'll be self-employed.
Right.
We're seeing a distinct context of self-employment, not entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship means you need to build an organization and employ people. But the self, and I think part of the whole job readiness today is job in an organization. But actually, self-employment is becoming a large category today of availability for jobs. So when we're looking at this 200 million jobs that we need to create, the consultancy sector, the banking sector, the insurance sector, even the IT sector is not going to absorb too many more people.
Yeah.
So I think between the new economies and self-employment, and not the professionals like the lawyers and the chartered accountants, but at very different levels, is going to create a new ecosystem.
Right. So, we're talking about disruptors to begin with. Tech has been a huge disruptor. It is certainly creating a lot of efficiency, but I'm sure it is also creating a certain amount of anxiety, particularly the young people, in terms of what it might do to their job prospects. And there are a lot of industry leaders who have said that it will create different kinds of jobs, etc., but we are in this transition phase at this point in time. AI can be a huge enabler. We need to embrace it. I think that's the advice that we get. But at the same time, there is it requires huge capital also, etc. So there is generally in the ecosystem, whether you are an entrepreneur or you are somebody who's working, there is a certain amount of anxiety as to what it might do. How do you see AI as an
I see it as good anxiety. I see it as a positive energy. The new generations are wired very, very differently. Are they a lot more anxious? No, they're growing up in that. Actually, the anxious is sitting on between the two of us here that we are anxious on that. That they're less anxious at that level because they're growing up on that. They're wired on that. That they know how they're going to survive on that and what their innovations they're going to make because they are the consumer of that context.
Right.
So again, just as an illustration, we have our large university, Atlas University at BKC that we run. And we have a board at the head of McKinsey and two consultancy companies. Mr. Deepak Parekh came in and we were addressing about 2,000 of our students there. So one of the advisory board members started by saying, so maybe I want to share with you what I believe are going to be the careers of tomorrow. And these three young girls raised their hand and said, sir, we just want to tell you, we will be telling you what the careers of tomorrow are. I don't think you're going to be able to tell us what the careers of tomorrow are.
Wonderful.
And that sums it up.
That sums it up. Yeah, exactly.
That sums it up. And therefore, that's one part. I think the second part is the ability for you to earn 3 times more than what you could have earned if you embrace technology. That opportunity is bigger. Yeah. So yes, you will have some sense of displacement. But on an overall, if I was looking at a GDP level, the ability to leverage yourself more and get to a 40 lakh versus what would have taken you 8 years to get to that in your journey or cycle of promotions and increments, that's not going to be linear. It's going to be non-linear.
Right.
So I think opportunities are going to be much more non-linear than linear. So gone are the days where you could say you're going to get a 10% increment or 50% increments, and over the next 10 years, this is where I want to be. So that generation, not where do you want to be 5 years from now? They'll say, wait a minute, but I'm looking at the next 3 things that I'm going to do here. Because frankly, if you ask me, and because of Upgrad, that insight I get is, I'd say in 5 years, a fair part of the population is going to have dual jobs. And not in a way of cheating. We're not being disloyal to anyone. It's not, I think it's a question of, you could be a specialist in some and a generalist in some, right? I mean, COVID has taught us that hybrid working is acceptable. That's but that's geography. Right. That's being in a place or not being in a place.
Right.
The actual context is that I could have 2 jobs. Right. Because this whole gig economy is also a little bit passe because you can be 2 different things to 2 different organizations. You can actually be self-employed and doing something, but have enough time to add to somebody.
Is this generational shift which is causing the consumerism shift to happen and embrace technology? And I mean, we still talk about maybe, half of India still not having access to internet, and yet we have got to this pass. So when
that also is a statistical. I'm seeing it at 3 different. We are working in a particular ecosystem of our own, and the teams that we hire is a certain level. Then I've got all our learners in Upgrad, and that's We have active learners of 250,000 at any given time, but 1 million people. I do webinars on Saturday and Sunday. The cross-section of questions that people ask you there, it's a very different thought process. And then when I go to villages and we're talking to the youth there and their aspirations, what they were 5 years back to now, if you look at these three benchmarks, they're quite different in their approach, but the aspirations are growing. They're all heading in the same direction if you look at it from that point of view.
But Ronnie, I mean, your journey has been inspirational to many, I'm sure. And as I said, I mean, these facets, while you humanize them so well, and you say that you balance them, etc., I'm sure it's considering, you know, that you've spanned multiple decades almost to do it. But if there is one thing that you would say across everything that you have done so far, which you in the moment must have felt very good about it, but when you reflect back, you feel most proud about. There may not be one, but I'm just asking if there is one thing which...
I mean, I'd like to say the frugal approach to everything that one is doing. I think I've even in 30 years, I've retained that element of a very... And frugal doesn't always mean money. It can mean anything, just in terms of resources, the way you do it, just the approach in which you think about it, the way, the simplicity. Simplicity is also frugality. It's not only that you're spending less in that, but I think that early upbringing of frugality has kind of just makes the iceberg melt every time somebody wants to build a castle and you say, okay, that's fine, but now can we not do it this way? What if we had to do it this way?
Right.
That allows you to have a longer runway for anything you want to do, because success is all about timing.
Yeah.
It's only about timing.
Yeah.
Because the minute before a failure, or just after a failure could be success.
Right.
And you might be giving up at that 5 minutes before that. Yeah. So the ability to be able to give yourself a longer runway for anything you want to do in life is frugality. So to me, it's an evolved thought, but it's actually quite simple in my mind.
Wonderful, wonderful. The next one, Ronnie, is I'm sure you possibly, considering the various things that you do, I'm sure you get asked this question very often. But let's say there is a young boy or girl wanting to do something of their own, and you mentioned entrepreneurship earlier or self-employment. What would you ask them to think about, right? I mean, it could be multiple things. There are multiple opportunities, but what would you tell them that, you know, before you try and venture out by yourselves, think about ABC. What would those ABC be? I
think it's what are you willing to give up? Because that's very important. Because you're going to have to give up a lot. You're just going to have to give up a lot. There's no question about that. You can call it this, you can call it that, but you have to give up a lot. The question of what you would need to do and now go first, do an MBA for 2 years and then come back, those are all semantics.
Right.
Because that could work or it may not work. Because if you did that, you'll have a plan B in your mind. And the minute you feel I've done my MBA means I can always go back and get a job. That means half your energy is going to think about the exit door. But I would say, all said and done, what are you willing to give up?
So, Ronnie, it's been a pleasure absolutely speaking to you. But if a movie were to be made on you, who do you think should be you?
No, I don't think it'll be very boring. Because I think outside of what we've just captured here, these are, I think, to get into a situation where you need to be inspiration, it's today, people are not looking at an entire story. They're looking at bite size. So I would say today, if anyone want to make things on this thing, make it on TikTok. Don't make a movie on it.
Yeah,
because you need the bite size. I think books are not read, chapters are read.
Very well put. Very well put. We see it on Facebook and many other social media all the time. Yeah. So thank you so much, Ronnie. It's been wonderful speaking to you and get your perspective on many things.
I think we had a very, very interesting conversation. Very diverse set that you asked me and got a lot out of the conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ronnie Screwvala's legacy is defined by entrepreneurial vision, transformative leadership, and a profound commitment to societal impact. Through his strategic foresight, dedication to ethical business practices, and focus on sustainable growth, Ronnie is paving the way for India's rise as a leader in global innovation, ensuring both economic success and positive societal change.